I told you, I can't remember. I just... No, it turned out that once you start doing research, this is what's great, this is the dirty secret of doing a book that takes like 4 years to research, is that history lines up for you. And when I decided blue, but I would have changed to, you know, crimson, you know, if it looked, but when you start to read about blue, and especially, you know, the phrase Sacre Bleu, you'll learn this in the book, but let's ruin it now. No, the blue prostitute in what the fuck was that? You saw it, and you saw it. No, I painted a number of people blue in my books, as did Mark Twain. He paints Tom Sawyer or Huck Finn blue in one of his books. It's an old literary tradition. At one point in Lamb, Biff is painted blue. Yeah. I have no reason for that except I just think it was cool. That's really the reason, like, that answers your question and probably most of these questions is that, like, why did you do this? And I'll probably, as I'm sitting here, I'll go, can I think of something that sounds reasonable? But most of the time it's just like, that would be cool.
Biff was on drugs.
Yeah, Biff was on drugs. Bless his heart. And learned to be a ninja. Connections? I think so. So, anyway. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So is because it's cool the reason you've been doing more literary historical fiction movie?
I've been doing more historical fiction. I go where it sort of leads me. You know, and where the subject leads me. And I have been looking at art. I've been doing this thing I described with, you know, stalking old ladies at the cafeteria for like 15 years. And I thought maybe, I grew up in this sort of, you know, Midwestern Calvinist, I would make, when I first came to California, I'd make calls like this. It's like, well, the grocery store I'm working in burnt down. And my mother would go, are you working hard enough? Because evidently the entire universe is all geared to how hard I'm working at any given time. And so, and those of you who were raised in the Midwest, you know that. You know that it's like that all ills come from, including, I mean, I've been around people who are dying of cancer that has nothing to do with the environment. You know, it's just one of those things, you know, genetic, and they'll be like, I just must not have worked hard enough. You probably just shouldn't have bought that myth. You know? There is such a thing as just fate wants to stomp on you and it doesn't really care how hard you're working. But since I had wasted all this time looking at art, by, you know, if you ask my parents evidently or anybody that I grew up with, I thought I've got to make that into something, and the art that drew me was that. But the decision to do it, historical books are a lot harder to do. But it was really the source material that led me there. It was Shakespeare led me to do Fool more than the history did, because the history was made up. This book was the hardest of them because they knew what these guys had for breakfast. I mean, when I did Lamb, it was like, there's 30 years of this guy's life. They don't know where he was. And I'm like, I can make that up. And everybody would be like, he didn't do that. I was like, you don't know he did. Jesus might have known Kung Fu. But these guys, they knew. The problem with this book was it was just a wealth of material. But it wasn't. I didn't decide to do it because of the history. You know, the history sort of happened because I decided to do it because of the art. So, any other questions? Sure, over here.
Because you were so drawn to the Impressionists, do you think you'll do any books on other art periods?
When I do books on other art periods, well, this book sort of hopscotches through art history, as you'll see. The modern art. Modern artists, this sort of leads into it, and I don't go through this in the book. There's a chapter guide that you'll find if you go to sacrebleu.me. That's the main sort of blog for Sacre Bleu. But then there's a thing that says chapter guide, and there's like every piece of art that's mentioned in this book is there, as well as like many of the places, photos of the places, and then my commentary. And part of what I do in there, and what you obviously already know, is that if you don't have Cezanne, you don't have Braque and Picasso, and if you don't have Braque and Picasso, you don't have Dali, and if you don't have, and you don't, you know, there's no Jackson Pollock without those guys, and there's no Jasper Johns without Jackson Pollock, and so, you know, this is where modern art starts, is with Cezanne. So would I write about him? I might, but I'm not as taken, you know, because the next art movement that happens is in the 20s in Paris. And that period has been so written about, and it would be even more constraining because, like I will tell you guys up front, I don't think this is the funniest book I've ever written. But part of the reason is I'm constrained by history. You know, the only person I could just go nuts with was Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, because he was hammered all the time. You know, so I'm like, yeah, he probably would have said that. But when you start to get into Picasso and Modigliani and that whole bunch, you know, from the 20s, they really do know what those guys said every minute of every day. So I think I'll just go see that Woody Allen movie. And Kurt Vonnegut wrote a great book called Blackbeard about the abstract expressionists. Probably my favorite Kurt Vonnegut book. So if you need more art with goofiness, that would be the place to go.